Right, so to the surprise of nobody on the left whatsoever, not really, and should be coming as less of a surprise to voters who have been putting Keir Starmer under some kind of scrutiny and familiarised themselves with the fact he breaks promises, pledges, missions, oaths, vows, obligations and assurances repeatedly, and then acts as if he did no such thing. He's now already breaking manifesto commitments, no less, and doing so whilst we're still in the election campaign period. In the Labour Party manifesto is a pledge regarding recognition of a state of Palestine, a key measure working towards a two-state solution, but Starmer is now already rowing back on this, to either delay, or as some Labour sources are saying, to abandon entirely, because they can afford to upset people for whom this is an important issue, who end up handing their vote to Labour anyway. What kind of administration decides before reaching power which people that supported them that they can afford to laugh in the faces of by abandoning certain pledges later that they told the nation they were committed to? One that will clearly lie with impunity once in power. Right, so Keir Starmer, already well known to be unabashedly pro-Israel, having effectively been bought and paid for by the Israel lobby as he has done significant damage to his party's reputation on the issue of Gaza as a result of that, especially over the last 9 months. And it very much looks like he's going to double down on that, having promised to recognise a Palestinian state as part of moves towards a two-state solution in his Labour Party manifesto. It states in that manifesto that Palestinian statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. It is not in the gift of any neighbour and is also essential to the long-term security of Israel. We are committed to recognising a Palestinian state as a contribution to a renewed peace process which results in a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. It's on page 124 of that 136-page Labour manifesto, if you care to look for it yourself. That far through it, hardly much of a priority for the party, you would think. But it is an issue gaining a lot of prominence, especially after Starmer cropped up on LBC saying Israel had the right to commit war crimes against Gaza, of course.
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist acts. And I would call on all responsible states, particularly Middle East responsible states, to call this out for what it is and to stand with the world in utterly condemning these actions by Hamas.
We will never let that clip go, especially since Starmer continues to deny he ever said any such thing and certainly will not apologise for it. Now, however, it looks like he's bidding this manifesto pledge, or doing so to a certain extent, perhaps just dipping it in and out of the bin bag, in Israel's interest, it seems, but also in the interest of the US. Apparently it is in their gift to give this statehood to Palestine. It apparently now becoming a concern that our foreign policy, being out of kilter with US foreign policy, would damage the special relationship, which is an absolute sick joke of a relationship right now anyway, when the US are the chief arms salesman to the Netanyahu regime committing genocide in Gaza, and we've done nothing but go along and support them all the way in this country. What Keir Starmer is saying there is hardly news to many of us, I dare say, but it is that Labour will very much continue in that vein, and therefore when people say UK foreign policy is being set in Washington, that looks very much to be the truth, does it not? The policy itself, significantly out of keeping with the wants or desires of the Labour right, the pro-Israel wing of the party, was always being pushed by those few voices on the Labour left to recognise Palestinian statehood, demanding that it happen sooner rather than later, and that it should be a key first step in the UK recognising the wrongs it committed, the historical wrongs due to our involvement in the creation of the Israeli state. Another British Empire made mess as it was, handing Palestinian land over to displaced European Jews and to the Zionist movement that had existed since the 1880s and had been building up throughout the decades leading up to that moment, Balfour Declaration, when this all came to pass. But now it looks set to get pushed back at the urging of those same pro-Israel voices, telling Starmer it risks our relationship with the US if he were to push ahead with it. In their view, as is the case on seemingly every policy area these days, the Labour right believe the Labour left can be safely ignored and not cost them the election, and with a supermajority in Parliament potentially very likely, the rump of the Labour left would be rendered completely toothless, even if they opposed everything every step of the way. Starmer's argument has been that to deliver this policy anyway, it would need to be done alongside other allies, which frankly comes across as code for doing whatever genocide Joe Biden wants. But given other allies all tend to be very one-sided on this matter, i.e. they are all nations who already do not recognise a Palestinian state, and the US of course keeps blocking recognition of a Palestinian state at the UN Security Council, it's a very weak reasoning and shows total lack of leadership on this issue, rather that Starmer would be a sheep beholden to the whims of others and would hide behind excuses akin to matters not being solely in his hands to deliver on. It is simply not true. It is his arbitrary choice as leader of this country, as he hopes to be come next week, that he would be able to do this. He's basically saying he's not going to do that now. Or the influence of those he surrounds himself with, perhaps they're whispering in his ear a little bit, and when indeed that comes down to donors more often than not, the people he would really be serving once in power, that would very much influence his decision-making, and a decision not to act in light of that is just displaying complete cravenness and weakness. 145 countries worldwide recognise Palestine as a state in its own right. How come they would all be stronger and showing better leadership than Keir Starmer in which case? The governments of Norway, Spain and Ireland have all recognised Palestinian statehood in light of the atrocities committed there by Israel, especially in Gaza, since the events of October 7th. These countries and their leaders are showing leadership on this right now. They are choosing to lead on this issue and not, as repeated governments here seem to do, look at America, cite the special relationship, and our prime ministers, one after the other, no matter whether they are Tories or Labour, just take turns in being the lapdog of whoever happens to be the US president of the day. The argument of the Labour right is that aside from the special relationship with the US being potentially threatened by any delusions of taking a lead here in the UK for a change on foreign policy, and on the matter of Palestinian statehood specifically, is that it will have more impact if they wait, and that a secure Israel is needed first. Waiting simply allows the UK to continue supplying Israel with weapons, military equipment and training. Waiting just enables the genocide to continue and more lives to be lost. Israel back in the north of Gaza right now, pounding Gaza City again, while still assaulting Rafah in the south. So there's no end in sight here, because the pressure is not being supplied, and it's hardly Israel who are insecure as a result of their actions in Gaza, is it? Let's talk about Israeli security for a moment, though, because it is relevant. The very thing that has made Israel less secure has been Israel's own actions in Gaza. No excusing the actions of Hamas in any way there, but the response from Israel was anything but proportionate, and now it is finding itself set on fire in the north by Hezbollah firing upon them. Over 100,000 Israelis evacuated from the north as a result of that, further south, displaced from their homes. You have attacks from Syria. You have attacks from the Houthis in Yemen, blockading shipping. You have Israeli port cities being struck by the Islamic State of Iraq, ISIL. There was the strike on Iran's embassy in Syria, prompting them to fire on Israel as well. All of Israel's insecurities have been brought down upon them by themselves, by its own government specifically, by Netanyahu and his coalition of madmen. So how can we possibly make Israel secure first, given its own conduct? It's totally backwards thinking. It is the wrong way round. How about we start with Palestine first? Recognise the state of Palestine. Be a leader and do that. Stop the weapons sales. Hold Israel to account for their actions instead of pretending that Hamas are somehow worse, and that the attacks Israel have perpetrated since the night of October 7th are a justifiable response to Hamas's depraved actions, especially when taking into consideration the problems out there go back a lot further than just last October, and Israel have very much been the aggressor and remain the occupiers, in no small part bringing the likes of Hamas into existence in response to those historic actions. Engage in boycott, divestment, sanctions, treating Israel as the apartheid state that it is, because recognition of Palestine won't be more effective if we wait. It just makes us complicit in even more death and destruction, when a proper, sane leader, a humane leader, as a former human rights lawyer ought to be, really, shouldn't it? Should be saying enough is enough to this. Instead, Starmer simply reminds us there's little semblance of a human rights lawyer left about him anymore, because human rights just don't appear to register in his thinking and in his politics. Just the whims of donors and the Israel lobby that he cannot afford to upset, as more and more party members desert him, taking their cash with them and elsewhere to other parties with a much saner viewpoint, capable of actually showing some leadership on this issue. For example, here is what the Green Party would do instead. An immediate and permanent bilateral ceasefire, a durable political solution that ensures security and equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. This is the only way to achieve long-term security for the people of Palestine and Israel. Recognition of the state of Palestine and an urgent international effort to end the illegal occupation of Palestinian land. Investigation and prosecution of war crimes. We believe there is strong evidence to support South Africa's submission to the International Court of Justice that Israel is guilty of genocide in its conduct in Gaza. An end to all UK arms exports to and military cooperation with Israel, which makes the British government complicit in these war crimes. It makes a lot more sense, that, doesn't it? We can't rely on the Labour left to hold Starmer to account. If they shout too loudly, they'll probably face censure, and strongly worded letters won't cut it either. More Green MPs, for instance, will hold Starmer to account on issues such as this, more so than certainly most other parties will. So I really hope we see more Green MPs as a result. There will be a lot more Green voices that will genuinely hold Labour accountable. Labour is too under the thrall of Israel lobbyists and vested interests and donors, and far too close to a US administration which could end these atrocities overnight if it pulled the plug on supporting Israel in continuing its assault on Palestine. And Starmer once more is exposed as a liar when his words, according to his own manifesto even, cannot even last the full duration of a snap election campaign. How much more of what is written in it will he bin off once in power? You cannot believe a word that man ever says. You always have to wait until you see what he actually does. And if you end up with MPs like Luke Akehurst, for example, who is now relying on the Israel lobby itself, it seems, to campaign for him because Labour members refuse to, who exactly will Starmer's Labour really be representing here? Akehurst's campaign calamities are getting worse, as this video recommendation will tell you all about the latest, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.